Hello everyone, my name is Tim Hartleben and today I will be covering a brief presentation on the political history and institutions for the Commonwealth of Australia. Australia is technically referred to as the Commonwealth of Australia or just Commonwealth as many Australian and Aboriginal natives would refer. On January 26, 1788, Captain Arthur Phillips guided a fleet of 11 British ships carrying convicts to Botany Bay and began construction of the colony of New South Wales, effectively founding Australia. The Commonwealth of Australia came into being when the federal constitution was proclaimed by the Governor-General Lord Hopetoun on January 1, 1901. From that point, a system of federalism in Australia came into operation, entailing the establishment of an entirely new national government. The, the land of Australia is comprised of just about 7.7 million square kilometers. Although this is just 5% of the world's landmass, Australia is the planet's sixth largest country, and it is also the only one of the largest six nations that is completely surrounded by water. Australia is the smallest of the world's continents. It is also the lowest and flattest and driest, with the exception of Antarctica. Here's just a few key political events that have happened throughout Australia's expansive political history. In 1770, British sovereignty was established. In 1823, foundations of democracy was established for the colony of New South Wales. In 1828, trial by jury was established under the Australian Courts Act. In 1836, proclamation creates the province of South Australia. So this is going to separate um, the now Northern Australia and give South Australia its own government. In 1855, colonial parliaments were established. In 1885, the Australasian Federal Council was created. 1911, the Commonwealth Northern Territory Acceptance Act of 1910 was passed. In 1920, Australia joins the League of Nations after signing the Treaty of Versailles. In 1945, Australia joins the United Nations. In 1954, Queen Elizabeth II is made monarch of the UK, Australia, and her other territories. So I'm going to focus on the 1823 events, which begin to sort of accumulate into the smallest and most beginning forms of democracy for the Commonwealth of Australia. The Charter of Justice on 13 October 1823 established a system of justice for Van Diemen's Land and provides for the appointment of John Louis Petter to preside over it as Chief Justice. The New South Wales Act of 1823 authorizes the establishment of a legislative council in New South Wales and Australia's first Supreme Courts in New South Wales and Van Diemen's Land, as well as providing for Van Diemen's Land to become a separate colony. The Legislative Council conducts its first meetings in August of 1824. These new laws follow criticisms of the administration and justice system in the New South Wales and Van Diemen's Land by Commissioner John Bigg. So the reason all this was happening was in 1823, modes of transportation were very primitive. Considering Australia was its own continent, they had to travel from the UK. It just was not feasible. So UK Parliament decided, okay, we're going to give Australia their own semi sort of centralized government. And it did work for quite some time. The current institutions sort of equate to what we have in our own country today. They have the legislative, executive, and judiciary branches. The legislative branch includes the bicameral parliament, which is defined in Section 1 of the Constitution as comprising the monarch, the Queen, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. The executive branch consists of the Federal Executive Council, which in practice gives legal effect to the decisions of the cabinet, comprising of the Prime Minister and Ministers of State who advise the Governor General. The judiciary branch consists of the High Court of Australia and other federal courts, whose judges are appointed by the Governor General on advice of the Federal Executive Council. So it really, if you look at this, we're seeing a lot of similarities to the democracy that operates within our own government today. Okay. Here's a few of the key figures who control and head certain branches in Australia, and I could have listed so many. I mean, there's just so much. There's so many different bodies that comprise Australian, political heads. So firstly, we have Queen Elizabeth II. She is the Queen of the United Kingdom and all realms and territories, which includes Australia. Um, Next, we have Scott Morrison, and I laugh because, yeah, well, I'll cover him in my current events presentation. We're not going to go into him right now. So he is the Prime Minister of Australia. Um, he's also the head of government, and he heads the executive branch. So he is the President of Australia, if we were to identify his office. Next, we have Susan Keitel. She is the Chief Justice of Australia. She is the head of the judiciary branch. Lastly, we have the Honorable Scott Ryan. He is President of the Senate and the leader of the legislative branch. So, oftentimes when people think of Australia, they think of it as its own independent country, which it kind of is, but it's also largely not. Um, it's important to note that it's often overlooked that Australia is essentially controlled and owned by Queen Elizabeth II. When you think of that notion politically, policies and laws that are enacted in the UK can often gain quite a negative traction to citizens of Australia. We have this large population of people that are essentially not only governed by their political heads of office, but those political heads of office are controlled from halfway across the world in the United Kingdom. So when the United Kingdom is making decisions, and those decisions negatively affect the citizens of Australia, you're going to have a tough time keeping your citizens in a positive state of mind. Also, considering the fact that when colonized, the native inhabitants or the Aboriginals were pushed aside and only recently recognized by the Australian government, let alone the UK, our own country can kind of relate to that. Um, and as the largest landowner in the world, the Queen uses prime ministers to essentially run countries, Australia including, as a semi-silent owner. And I say semi-silent owner because the Queen has in place in all her vast realms, territories, countries. She has these prime ministers. She has other delegates. She has political organizations that are controlling these countries independently, but they all ultimately answer to her. So she runs these countries in sort of I would consider a very mild manner. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. I really look forward to the current events portion of this project. As within the past few years, we all know that Australia has had some pretty tremendous trouble politically.